They never imagined they would cry that day. The same people who once mocked her poverty now sat in silence, tears falling as they watched her walk down the aisle. She looked like everything they once said she would never become. Her steps were calm, her face unreadable, and her presence commanded a respect no money could buy. The man who once left her for another woman could not look away. His heart burned with regret, and his eyes glistened with the tears he tried to hide. The woman beside him shifted uneasily, her pride swallowed by shame. Everyone who laughed at her when she was nothing now cried because they could not undo their cruelty. But that moment was only the ending of a story that began in pain. Long before the gown, before the glory, before the whispers of admiration, there was only hunger, humiliation, and hopelessness. She was not born into comfort. Her name was Amelia, and her earliest memories were of struggle. She grew up in a crumbling house that could barely keep out the wind. Her mother washed clothes for neighbors who underpaid her, and her father left before she was old enough to remember his face. Poverty became her shadow, following her wherever she went, mocking her dreams before others could. Every morning, Amelia woke before dawn, her stomach already aching from hunger. She would sweep the compound, fetch water, and help her mother carry laundry to the richer part of town. As they passed the beautiful houses, she often wondered how people could live with such abundance while others went days without food. Her mother never complained, but Amelia could see exhaustion in her eyes, the quiet kind that comes from years of disappointment. School was her only escape, but even there, she was a target. Her torn uniform and worn-out sandals drew laughter from classmates. Some avoided her entirely, others made her pain their entertainment. She learned early that the world respected money, not character. Yet, she carried herself with quiet dignity. She believed, deep down, that life would not always remain this cruel. By the time she turned 16, Amelia had stopped hoping for miracles. She began selling roasted corn by the roadside after school. The smoke darkened her skin, the heat bruised her hands, and the stares of passers-by burned deeper than the fire she cooked on. She heard their words, the poor girl, the one with nothing, the one who will never amount to anything. But she said nothing. She simply smiled, even when her heart ached. Her mother's health began to fail soon after. The long years of hard labor and poor feeding weakened her body. Amelia tried to work harder, selling food, washing plates in restaurants, and doing anything that could bring home money. But no matter how much she tried, poverty refused to leave. She often sat at night beside her mother, holding her frail hand, promising a better life that even she did not know how to find. When her mother died, Amelia's world crumbled. There was no one left to call her name with love. The few relatives she had turned their backs, calling her a burden. She was forced to leave school, forced to find her way alone. She slept in unfinished buildings, sometimes skipping meals for days. Life became a blur of hunger and humiliation. But even in her suffering, she had one thing that kept her going: hope. She told herself she would rise. She told herself that one day, those who mocked her would regret it. She didn't know how or when, but she believed it. It was during this time that she met Daniel. He came into her life like sunlight after endless rain. He was charming, confident, and spoke words that sounded like promises of heaven. He told her she deserved better, that he would help her escape her suffering. For the first time, someone looked at her as though she was worth something. She began to believe again. Daniel would visit her where she sold roasted corn, sometimes bringing gifts, a loaf of bread, a small bottle of perfume, or new sandals. To her, these were treasures. She trusted him completely. He made her dream of a life beyond poverty, a life where she would never have to beg for acceptance. Months turned into years, and Amelia's heart became tied to him. She believed his every word. She dreamed of marriage, of a home filled with love and laughter. But dreams, she would later learn, were fragile things. When Daniel got a better job in the city, he promised to come back for her. He made her believe she would soon leave the village and live with him in comfort. She waited, writing his name in the dust, thinking of him every night. But as time passed, his visits became fewer. His calls stopped. Rumors began to spread, whispers that he was seeing someone else. Amelia refused to believe it until she saw it with her own eyes. One afternoon, while delivering food to a client, she saw him, Daniel, stepping out of a car with a woman dressed in expensive clothes. They laughed together, their hands intertwined. When his eyes met hers, he looked away. There was no shame, no guilt, only coldness. She stood frozen, the tray of food shaking in her hands. The world seemed to go silent. The man who once said he loved her now acted like she was invisible. That night, Amelia sat by herself in the small shed she called home and cried until there were no tears left. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was humiliation. Everyone who knew them laughed behind her back. They said she was foolish for believing that a man like Daniel would ever marry a poor girl like her. She tried to stay strong, but her heart broke into pieces too small to mend. Yet, even in her pain, something inside her hardened. She made a silent vow that night. She would rise, but she would not die in that place. She packed the only clothes she had into a small plastic bag and boarded a bus heading for the city. She didn't know what she would find there, but she told herself that anywhere was better than where she was. The city was louder, harsher, and far more unforgiving than she expected. Tall buildings surrounded her like giants, and the people moved quickly, eyes filled with purpose. Nobody noticed her, just another girl lost among thousands. She slept for days in unfinished buildings, sometimes under bridges, sometimes behind shops. The nights were long, and the mornings cruel. Her body grew weaker, but her will hardened. Days turned into weeks. She begged for work at restaurants, cleaning offices, or washing clothes. Most times, they told her to leave. A few allowed her to scrub floors for small coins. She saved every little she earned, sometimes buying only water just to save enough to eat the next day. Hunger became her companion, but she learned to live with it. One afternoon, while sitting outside a bakery, the smell of fresh bread filled the air, torturing her empty stomach. She had not eaten for 2 days. Her eyes watered as she watched people come out holding loaves she could not afford. The bakery owner, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Carter, noticed her. She was not a kind woman, but she was practical. She asked Amelia if she could help clean the bakery in exchange for food. That day marked the first real step in Amelia's survival. The work was hard, scrubbing, lifting, sweeping, and cleaning ovens, but it gave her something she had not felt in a long time: purpose. She worked without complaint, her hands bleeding, her back aching, but she never stopped. Mrs. Carter was rough and often shouted, but she saw something in Amelia, a quiet strength, a patience that no hardship could break. Over time, she began to pay her small wages. It wasn't much, but Amelia saved every coin. She slept in a small room behind the bakery, where the smell of dough and heat from the ovens became her comfort. For months, this became her life. Work, clean, save, sleep. She barely spoke to anyone. She avoided friendships because she had learned that people disappeared when life became hard. She trusted only herself and the quiet voice inside that told her to keep going. But poverty, even when endured, never stops testing you. One evening, after closing hours, Mrs. Carter's son accused Amelia of stealing. The missing money wasn't hers, but no one believed her. The humiliation of standing in front of others as they searched her bag broke something inside her. When they found nothing, Mrs. Carter still told her to leave. "Where there is poverty, there is trouble," the woman said coldly. Amelia left without a word. Her savings were gone, taken as compensation. She stood outside in the dark, clutching her empty bag. Her heart was heavy, not just with pain, but with a new kind of anger. The world had taken everything from her again. For days, she wandered, sleeping anywhere she could find. She ate leftovers from restaurant bins, washed her face in public taps, and wore the same torn dress every day. People looked at her like dirt, but she no longer cared. She had learned that dignity wasn't in clothes or money, it was in refusing to give up. One night, as she sat alone outside a tailoring shop, she watched a woman sewing under dim light. The rhythmic sound of the sewing machine calmed her. She stood there for hours, watching, memorizing every motion. Something inside her stirred. It was as if the machine's hum was calling to her. The next morning, she approached the woman, asking to help with cleaning the shop for no pay. The woman, tired but kind, agreed. Amelia began sweeping, folding fabrics, and running errands. She watched closely, learning without being taught. After weeks of quiet observation, she began to sew small scraps of fabric during her free time. The woman noticed her determination and slowly started guiding her. That was how Amelia's second life began. She learned quickly. Her stitches were neat, her patterns precise, her passion endless. Sewing became her escape, a way to turn her pain into creation. Every dress she made was like a story she couldn't tell in words. The woman paid her little, but to Amelia, every penny was hope. Months later, tragedy struck again. The shop owner fell sick and died, and the shop closed. Amelia was left alone once more. But this time, she wasn't the same helpless girl. She had a skill now, something no one could take away. She used the little money she had saved to buy a small second-hand sewing machine. She set it up under a bridge where she once slept, making small clothes for anyone willing to pay. People began to notice her work. Her designs were simple but beautiful, and her neatness drew customers. Slowly, she earned enough to rent a tiny room. It wasn't much, just a single mattress and space for her machine, but to her, it was paradise. She spent her nights sewing, her hands working until they bled, her mind filled with dreams of a better life. She didn't have friends, she didn't go out, but she had peace. She had found something worth living for. Years passed, and her work grew popular. Her small business began to grow through word of mouth. Women from nearby areas came to her for dresses. One of them, a boutique owner named Mrs. Evans, saw her potential and offered to sell her designs in her shop. Amelia's work began to reach people she never thought would wear something made by her hands. Still, she never forgot where she came from. The memory of hunger and humiliation kept her humble. She continued to live simply, working long hours, saving every coin. But success, even in its small beginnings, draws attention, both good and bad. One day, while delivering clothes to the boutique, Amelia saw a familiar face. It was Daniel, the same man who had once left her. He was dressed well, but his eyes had lost their light. Life had not been as kind to him as he expected. He recognized her instantly, and for a moment, his pride faltered. But Amelia walked past him as if he didn't exist. That silent moment became her first victory. The woman beside him, his wife, it seemed, was the bride she was designing for. Fate had written its cruel poetry again. Amelia finished her measurements and told the woman when to return for her final fitting. All the while, Daniel stood frozen, his face pale, unable to speak. When they left, Amelia sat quietly, the weight of irony pressing against her chest. She felt no tears, no anger, only a deep, chilling satisfaction. The universe had turned, and the girl he once deceived was now the one shaping the dress for his bride. That night, she went home and sat beside her new sewing machine. She looked at her calloused hands and smiled for the first time in years, not from joy, but from victory. She realized that she had risen beyond everything they had done to her. Not through forgiveness, not through love, but through strength and pain. She had become what they never believed she could be. Her designs spread beyond the city. People traveled miles to wear her creations. Fashion magazines began featuring her name. Grace Designs became a symbol of elegance and endurance. She moved into a larger workspace, hired young girls from the streets, and taught them what no one had taught her, how to turn pain into purpose. She gave them jobs, food, and hope. She saw in their eyes the reflection of her younger self, broken but not defeated. As success surrounded her, Amelia remained silent. She attended events only when necessary, always distant, always composed. Behind her calm demeanor lived the memory of betrayal, sharp and permanent. She built walls so high that no one could climb them. The same world that once spat on her name now worshipped it. Yet, deep inside, she knew she had lost something that could never return. Her ability to trust, to love, to be vulnerable. But she did not regret it. Some victories are born from wounds that never heal. And so, when invitations began arriving, social events, fashion awards, high-profile weddings, she attended them not as a guest of honor, but as a silent storm. People whispered her name, amazed at her transformation. They spoke of her grace, her power, her mystery. None of them knew that behind her success lay a graveyard of pain. The day came when she was invited to design for a billionaire's wedding. A ceremony so grand that it promised to change her career forever. She accepted, not knowing that the path she was walking would soon lead her back to the faces that had once laughed at her poverty. The girl who once starved on the streets was now being called the Queen of Fabric. But beneath the crown of success still lived the broken girl who had once vowed never to forgive. And fate, patient and cruel, was not yet finished with her story. The invitation to design for the billionaire's wedding arrived wrapped in gold paper, the kind of elegance Amelia used to only admire from afar. The message was brief but grand, offering her the opportunity to create the bridal collection for one of the most anticipated ceremonies of the year. For most designers, it was a dream come true. For Amelia, it was another test, a quiet storm sent by fate to measure how far she had truly come. Her reputation now carried weight in the world of fashion. Every stitch she made was a story people wanted to wear. She had built a name not through privilege, but through pain, and her success had become an unspoken rebellion against everyone who had once looked down on her. Yet, beneath the pride and strength, a part of her still trembled whenever her past was mentioned. She had buried that version of herself, the hungry girl, the betrayed woman, but the scars never faded. They only hid beneath the glow of achievement. When she arrived at the mansion where the wedding preparations were to begin, she was greeted with admiration and respect. The family had heard of her work, her brilliance, and her story of perseverance that inspired many. They saw only the powerful woman she had become, elegant, confident, untouchable. None of them recognized the ghost of the girl they once mocked. The house was enormous, with gardens that stretched like dreams and chandeliers that caught sunlight in diamonds. As Amelia walked through the halls, she felt the strange heaviness of memory pressing on her heart. The smell of polished marble and expensive perfume reminded her of how far she had come from the dust of the streets. Yet even in that glittering atmosphere, she felt something familiar, an ache she couldn't name. It wasn't until she saw the groom that the ache took form. The moment their eyes met, the world seemed to pause. Standing before her was Daniel's older brother, Christopher, a man who, years ago, had laughed at her, mocked her mother's death, and called her the beggar's daughter. Back then, his words had torn her heart open. Now, he looked at her with disbelief, struggling to match the memory of the girl in rags with the woman before him, poised, graceful, and breathtaking in quiet power. He stuttered a greeting, but Amelia's face remained calm, her expression unreadable. She nodded once and turned back to her sketches. Her silence was sharper than words. Christopher stood frozen, guilt spreading across his face like a slow wound. He had not seen her in years. The last memory he had was of her crying outside their family compound, begging for food. The sight of her now, polished, respected, and commanding the attention of his household, was punishment enough. Days turned into weeks as preparations continued. Amelia designed every dress with the precision of someone who understood beauty born from suffering. Her gowns flowed like poetry, each thread carrying the strength of her story. The mansion buzzed with excitement, but beneath the luxury, Christopher's guilt grew heavier. He tried to speak to her once, but she brushed past him with polite professionalism. Forgiveness was not something she offered. Her silence was her justice. Then, as fate would have it, Daniel appeared one afternoon. He had come to visit his brother, unaware that Amelia was there. The moment he saw her, he stopped as if struck by lightning. His once confident face drained of color. The memories of betrayal flashed through his mind. The coins he had stolen, the promises he had broken. Now, standing before him was the woman he had destroyed, reborn in power and grace. She did not look at him twice. She simply continued working, her presence louder than any confrontation could ever be. Daniel tried to approach her, to apologize, to explain, but she never responded. Every attempt was met with the same calm indifference. He realized, too late, that forgiveness was not his to ask. His guilt became his torment. He watched her glide through the mansion, directing her team with elegance and precision. The woman he had once used and discarded was now the one setting the tone for his brother's wedding, and she looked untouchable. The wedding day arrived, golden and glorious. The world seemed to gather in that mansion. Powerful men, wealthy families, and faces from every corner of society. Photographers filled the gardens. Reporters whispered her name with admiration. Amelia stood quietly at the back of the hall, dressed in a simple but elegant gown of her own design. She did not seek attention. She didn't need it. Her presence alone commanded it. As the ceremony began, she watched the crowd, scanning faces, and there, among the guests, she saw them. People from her village, faces she had once known. The same people who had mocked her poverty, who had laughed when she begged for help, who had whispered that she would never become anything. Now, they sat in awe, dressed in borrowed elegance, unaware that the designer of the entire event was the girl they had rejected. They stared at the gowns, the decorations, the floral arrangements, all creations of her hands. And when the bride walked down the aisle in a gown Amelia had crafted, the hall fell silent. The beauty of the design was unmatched, pure, graceful, divine. Whispers spread through the crowd about the mysterious designer who had created such magic. And when the host finally announced her name, a shock rippled across the room. Designed by the brilliant Amelia Grant of Grace Designs. The murmurs grew. People turned, searching for her. When they saw her standing calmly at the back, their faces changed, disbelief, guilt, and shame mixing into a storm of realization. The ones who had once laughed now lowered their eyes. The ones who had ignored her poverty now fought the weight of regret. Some wept quietly, remembering the girl they had mocked at the marketplace, the girl who had begged them for a little help. Even Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He wanted to speak, but no words came. His heart sank under the weight of his own betrayal. Christopher couldn't look at her. Their mother, the same woman who had called Amelia trash years ago, now approached her after the ceremony, trembling and broken. She tried to thank her for the beauty she had brought into their family's name, but Amelia simply nodded, her expression calm and distant. She had no words left for those who had buried her alive once. The air grew heavy as the music played on. Amelia turned and left the hall quietly, her heels echoing against the marble floor. She did not look back. She didn't need to. Behind her were the tears of those who had mocked her. Ahead of her was peace, not the peace of forgiveness, but the peace of victory. That night, she sat in her studio, staring at the city lights through her window. For the first time in her life, she felt something close to freedom. Not joy, not love, but the quiet satisfaction of surviving everything meant to destroy her. She had walked through pain, betrayal, hunger, and humiliation, and yet she stood untouched, unbroken, undefeated. She thought of her mother, of the little girl who once cried in the dirt, and whispered a silent promise that their suffering had not been in vain. Her eyes filled with tears, not from sorrow but from strength. The world had finally seen her, and they had cried. The morning of Amelia's wedding began in quiet elegance. There was no noise, no chaos, just calm power echoing through the grand hall she had chosen for her day. The air smelled of white roses and soft lavender. Every corner glowed with gold, crystal, and class. This was not just a wedding, it was a statement, a silent echo of every tear she had once cried, now replaced with the brilliance of triumph. Amelia looked at herself in the mirror. The reflection staring back was not the same girl who once scrubbed the floors of a restaurant or begged for leftover bread behind kitchen doors. This woman was carved from pain and perseverance, refined by betrayal, and crowned by victory. Her gown flowed like the whisper of grace itself, simple yet royal, designed from her own hands. The hands that once trembled from hunger now stitched a legacy of strength. As the guests began to arrive, whispers filled the room like smoke. The chandeliers reflected on faces that once smirked at her poverty, faces that once pointed fingers when she passed through the market in torn slippers. They had gathered now, dressed in fine clothes, hiding their shame behind forced smiles. The very people who had laughed when she was poor were now in awe, and every stolen glance toward her carried regret. Daniel stood among them. His suit was fine, but his heart was broken. He had aged faster than his years, not from time but from guilt. He watched Amelia with eyes that burned with memory of the girl he once promised forever, then left for a woman with wealth that vanished as quickly as it came. His world had crumbled, his business had failed, and the woman he chose had deserted him when his fortune disappeared. But Amelia, the one he betrayed, had risen higher than his imagination could ever reach. He could barely breathe as she walked down the aisle. Each step she took was heavy with meaning. It was not joy that carried her forward, but quiet vengeance. She moved with the grace of someone who had conquered storms and learned to smile in the ashes. Every step was a chapter closed, every glance a reminder that pain had birthed power. The hall fell silent. Even the orchestra seemed to pause as she reached the altar. Her groom, a gentle, dignified man who loved her scars as much as her beauty, stood waiting, eyes filled with pride, not possession. He had met her when she had already built her empire, when her name had become a symbol of resilience. He didn't choose her for her status. He loved her story, the broken girl who refused to die in her pain. Daniel's chest tightened as he realized that this man now held the heart he had shattered. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. Every moment of the ceremony was a mirror of his own failure. When the officiant spoke words of love and strength, Daniel heard echoes of his betrayal. When Amelia smiled faintly at her groom, he saw the forgiveness he never received, because she had learned to move beyond revenge, beyond him, into something higher. But even in her beauty, even in her grace, Amelia did not forget. Her eyes occasionally drifted toward the crowd, toward the people who had once mocked her, toward the family members who had shut their doors, toward the faces that had watched her suffer without pity. They avoided her gaze, but shame weighed on their shoulders like chains. She didn't need to say a word. Her presence was enough to humble them all. After the vows, when the music began and the guests rose to applaud, tears filled the room, not of joy, but of realization. They cried because they saw what she had become. They cried because their laughter had turned into their own punishment. Every tear shed that day was for the version of her they had refused to see, the broken girl they thought would never rise. Daniel left the hall quietly. He couldn't bear the sight any longer. Outside, the air was thick with guilt and silence. He looked back one last time, watching Amelia laugh with grace among people who now adored her. For a moment, he wished she would look at him, but she never did. She didn't need to. He had already been erased from the story she rewrote without him. Inside, Amelia felt no urge to forgive. She had forgiven herself long ago, and that was enough. She didn't need to erase the pain to move forward. She just learned to turn it into power. Her smile that day was not for love alone. It was for survival, for victory, for every sleepless night she had endured while the world turned its back on her. As the evening ended, she stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The city lights shimmered against the night sky, a reflection of everything she had fought for. In her heart, she whispered a promise, not to the past, but to the girl she used to be. That no matter how broken the beginning, the ending could still shine.